Hi everyone. So this is the ninth synchronous learning session, and this is a pre-recording of me discussing the module 9 content, which is on mouth codes. So mouth codes is going to be part of your last three modules, which will enterprise your entire project. So before you actually move on to your module 9, there is quite a need for you to understand your module 8, which is exposure sheet. So please try to look into the pre-recorded synchronous learning session on how you're going to do that. So once you've already had that, we will now be looking into creating the mouth codes. So in this lesson, I'll be talking about a short introduction of mouth codes and why are they important. We also have some factors in creating mouth codes because you will be creating them. And then the last one is I'll be showcasing some of the mouth codes. I will also be explaining a little bit about the activity and how this certain activity kind of weaves over throughout your entire final project. So with that one, let's talk about first what mouth codes are. So mouth codes in reality are defined as readily created mouth shapes based on the sounds that can be created by the character. So it mouth code is essentially just the shape of the mouth. A set of mouth shapes or mouth codes is actually which we call as mouth charts. So that might be something that I would like to clear up because when you go towards the internet, you might try to search mouth codes and you won't really find a lot. Instead, you will be seeing mouth charts. The reason is because a lot of the internet resources tend to have mouth charts, which is the repository itself, which includes the mouth codes. So please take note of that one. Mouth charts is the set, mouth code is the shape itself. So with that one, as due to that nature, you can kind of see that mouth codes is usually a part of a repository. So this repository actually helps or actually has the following. So first of all is we have of course our phonetic sounds. The reason why we even have mouth codes is because we would like to recreate the phonetic sounds that you see in speech, particularly consonants and vowels. So again, this has a lot more factors, so we'll be looking into those ones later. Next one is pre-life sounds. So pre-life sounds are these expressions or let's say voices or sounds that aren't really used in speech, but rather it can be used to evoke emotion. So for example, grunts, gasps, um, like click sounds, all of those ones could give an idea of what a person is doing or what a person is feeling without really saying anything. So it actually helps create more it's kind of a secondary action sort of thing wherein it helps enhance the main action which is happening. And then the last one is automatic dialogue replacement. So ADR or automatic dialogue replacement, this is a series of phonetic sounds that can compromise a specific type of speech that the character is saying. So this is usually done for gaming or when you're trying to create a character that says the same old thing. So this is more of their catchphrase or whatnot. So instead of having, let's say, individual phonetic sounds, you can just have the ADR. And for your mouth codes, this is really helpful, particularly for 2D animation. Or one of the best examples that I can say right now are AniTubers or animation YouTubers. So those people who create animations for of themselves, create story times anytime that they create animations. So you can kind of notice that the way that they speak is very accurate, yet at the same time they're kind of standard. So you tend to see them a lot. It's very accurate, it's very good. The reason for that one is because they have these mouth codes, and these mouth codes, really the main purpose of that one is to make your overall lip syncing process much faster and much more efficient. So let's say for digital animators, this is very useful because essentially you can just draw the mouth codes once, place them in a repository, then export them and copy them to the animation frame using another layer. And this can be a step up because for a lot of, let's say, animation applications, like let's say Toon Boom or Toon Boom Harmony, um, they tend to have, let's say, an actual repository already. So you don't really have to create your own. For traditional animators, this is not really, let's say, that it doesn't really make your process much faster, but it rather makes it more efficient, because what happens is that you can just simply trace the mouth shapes that you already have in a sheet without necessarily second guessing. So that really is the main advantage. If you would like to create a lot more action, if you want to make something that's moving but you don't really want to spend so much time on it, one way for you to utilize that is to just create dialogue and showcase the mouth codes without the character really saying, or without the character really moving that much. The disadvantages really is more on the idea that mouth codes makes it so that it's consistent. So if it's consistent, what happens is that it kind of makes it a little bit boring, which is something that you might see as a pattern in the animation world. If it's something that is more of a pattern or a template, it tends to get boring very quickly. So it cannot do really the following. Number one, customize sounds. So let's say if a person has a very specific accent or a very specific pre-life that is not part of the repository, you might have to redraw that. Another one is phonetic sounds with different intensities, meaning people who are, or characters who are shouting, characters who are whispering, or even certain emotions, which is the fourth one right here. So when it comes to, let's say, a repository, you can't just change, let's say, a character being happy by utilizing the same code as mouth code as a neutral mouth code, so to speak. So with that one, you can't really do, or you can't really give justice to specific emotions using phonetic sounds. If a character is shouting, their mouth tends to be bigger. If they're whispering, their mouth tends to be smaller. So just having the normal mouth codes doesn't really justify that the character is shouting or whispering. Another thing is that if your character tends to have a lot of squash and stretch, particularly on their face, or they have a lot of change in facial expression, which is again quite tied to the fourth one right here, you cannot really cater to that. However, in your activity, you don't really have all of these advantages, because once you have your exposure sheet, you can essentially just create the mouth codes based on that one, and you don't have to worry about redrawing or having unnecessary phonetic sounds. So when you're creating your for this one, you will be creating your own mouth codes. You will not be getting out of a pre-existing repository like the one you have for Toon Boom, or we have a add-in for Adobe Flash and Adobe Animate. Instead, you will be creating, and when you're creating your mouth codes for your own unique character, you have to take note into some different factors. So we have quite a lot of these ones, so let's run by them one by one. The first one is view or perspective. So view or perspective, where the character is facing essentially. So we have here two types. We have front and three-fourth views, and then we have side view. We don't necessarily create mouth codes for back three-fourth view. It is possible for us to be able to do that, but that again depends on the character design, the complexity, and how you really define back three-fourth view. Because some back three-fourth view can showcase some of the lips, whereas some don't really at all. And then it's really impossible for you to do mouth codes for back view, so we'll disregard that one. I have lumped in front view and three-fourth views because they kind of have the same properties in such a way that it's quite easier for you to be able to create lip syncing or mouth codes for front and three-fourth views rather than side view. So the idea right here is that you kind of have a space within your mouth or within your face where the mouth is just supposed to be, and you have a lot more liberty compared to that one of side view. And to some extent, if you see other styles, even though if the character is facing towards the front view, the mouth code can be three-fourth view. So that is something that's possible, but that again would depend on the design. And another characteristic of the front and three-fourth view is that the differences in mouth codes tend to be more subtle. So in terms of the movement, of course, you can see the opening, closing of the mouth, the shapes of the lips, and all of that one. But let's say some of the other complexities, like how, let's say, how protruded your lower lip is, your upper lip, the movement of your teeth, and even for the tongue, you can't necessarily showcase it that much for a front view or a three-fourth view. And also, when it comes to, let's say, the mouth codes, because of that, you tend to see a lot more similarities, particularly that of consonants. Whereas for side views, I would say that it's not really hard. What's difficult about the side view really is more of the application as a repository. So let's say for a front and three-fourth view, as I've stated, there's really a space for you to have to place your mouth codes. So let's say if you're a little bit off towards the placement of the mouth, it's quite okay because you have all of these space. Whereas for the side view, it's part of your profile. So the profile is essentially the line that creates your forehead, your nose, your lips, and then your jawline. So you can't really mess up that much of the alignment if you're going to do a side view. The main advantage really of side view is that if you really want to exaggerate, you're able to do that with the side view because everything can be seen. Mouth, lip movement, teeth, jawline, and even your tongue. Together with that one, they tend to be more accurate in terms of the lip syncing because you can see a lot more differences. The mouth codes are less similar. So, for example, let's say we have this specific mouth code in consonants that tend to be very similar for a front view and a three-fourth view. For the side view, you can kind of change it a little bit. So, that would again depend on the design. So that is for view and perspective. Next one is the phonetic sounds, which is the entire reason why we even have mouth codes. So with that one, the way or the type of phonetic sounds that you have can affect the type of mouth code that you will be creating. So I have here two examples. We have your vowels and your consonants. So your vowels for this one, we have, if you're going to really have a deep dive on phonetics, you would see that vowels are two types. We have long sounds and short sounds. So for example, we have the I sound. So the way that I say sheep versus ship. So for that one, you tend to have longer sounds and shorter sounds, but they tend to be similar. However, the difference between an ah sound, like let's say farm, the ah sound as in cat, and let's say the e sound for nest, those ones are very different. So you can see these very noticeable differences, even though they're not very significant, they are noticeable. So in such a way, vowels tend to have more differences in the formation of the mouth codes. So later on, you'll be seeing in our phonetic sounds, I believe there are 7 vowels, vowel sounds for phonetics, whereas consonants, even though there are technically more consonants, there are only around, I believe, 5 or 6. And then again, that would depend on the accent that you have. So for your consonants, as I've stated a while ago, you don't really have a lot of variety. The reason for that one is because if you look at the deep dive into consonants, you have two types. We have voiced and voiceless. So the way that you're able to create your voice is really more on the tongue. And for a front view or a side view or front view and three-fourth view, and even for the side view, the tongue changes or the articulation that is created by the tongue is really more of on the inside of your mouth. So you can't even see it even if you have a side view. So you with that one you tend to have a lot more similarities in the formation of the mouth codes. Like for example, all of these consonants right here can only be created using one mouth code. And another thing for consonants, it's quite alright for you to have lesser mouth codes because consonants don't really have a lot of exposure time. That's more for vowels. So with that one, it would be quite impractical for you as an animator to have all of these repository but only have 1 to 2 frames exposure time. So that is for phonetic sounds. Next one is the size of your mouth. So the size of your mouth, how big or how small it is, can affect or can be based on the audio that you have. So for example, for a bigger mouth, if your audio tends to have a lot of articulation, a lot of exaggeration, then you might need to have something like this. If your character has a very intense emotion or they speak quite loudly, then you might need to have a bigger mouth. The advantage of this one is you can exaggerate with this. So of course, the differences in the mouth codes can really be seen. For smaller mouths, however, like let's say the way that you whisper or even the neutral, unstressed way on how we speak, you don't really see a lot of differences. So the way that you're able to create a bigger mouth or a smaller mouth, that would depend on the audio. Together with the size, you can also create some things with it. So again, we have articulation, and even let's say the way that the person's timbre and pitch right here can be affected by the size of their mouth. So as I've stated, um, for example, the way that I say S, you might hear it in the audio, you might not hear it in the audio, but you can kind of hear a sharp S sound. So with that one, that is created by me having a lot of movement in my tongue. Whereas for other people, they don't really have that quirk. So the way that they say their S sound might be different than mine. So those are just some examples. We also have variations. So variations is kind of a basic principle in animation wherein if you use something too much, which is so consistent, it also makes it quite dull. So having variations in your mouth codes makes it more visually interesting and can help um, create different emotions. It can create different situations. Then again, this is a case to case basis. So here we have some variations. The first one is exposure time. So exposure time is more of the length of how a phonetic sound is spoken. So this is more applicable to vowels since we have long and short sounds. One example that we have right here is the word wow. So if you were to take the vowel O, what happens right here is that if you just have this one mouth code consistently throughout the entire exposure time, it looks like number one, the character isn't really amazed. Number two, it doesn't look like the character is saying anything. So having this gradual change in the mouth shape or the mouth sides would kind of give you an idea that the character really is saying something. So ways for you to be able to change variations similarly to, let's say, intensity is we have making the mouth smaller or bigger, stretching or squashing the face, and doing other things like, let's say, changing the mouth structure. So we'll be looking more into that one for facial expressions and emotion. Next one is intensity. So intensity, as we've stated a while ago, is more of how the character says the word. So it can be based on emotion. It can be if the character is screaming or whispering, or according to the situation of what the character is saying. So again, changing the mouth shape, the size of the mouth, squash and stretch, and other things, you can essentially create different intensities compared to, let's say, saying the same word by shouting it and saying the same word just whispering it. And then the last part for variation is facial expressions and emotion. So changing parts of how the mouth and the lips move, reflecting the different expressions and emotions is something that's necessary. So, for example, if the character is happy, but let's say the sides of their mouth aren't really reflecting that, that's not very convincing. So, for if the character is excited or happy, then usually the sides of the mouth would be upward. If the character is sad, you would see that their mouth has this kind of downward turn for the sides. And also, if a character is frustrated or angry, usually their teeth are clenched. So you would see a lot more gritting of the teeth if the character is kind of pissed or they're kind of holding back their anger. Next part is we have mouth acting. So mouth acting is not really something that you see in actual animation, but I've used this term because you might have seen this specific TikTok video. But to kind of give you the idea of this one, let me just play it while I am explaining a little bit. So, mouth acting is essentially how the mouth moves according to how, of course, a person says it. So, with that one, some people, even though they're saying the same thing or even based on their accent, what would happen is that their cheekbones would be a bit higher. Some of them would focus more on, let's say, not moving too much of the upper teeth or showing so much of the upper teeth. Some of them would be the lower teeth, some of them not at all. Some of them, even though that they are saying something a little bit more neutral, they might have more upturned teeth, and whatnot. So for that one, yeah, you have different actors, and the way on how they do their mouth acting really varies from person to person, even though, let's say, they might have the same dialogue, and it really helps into getting into your character or the one that you have created. So you can have other things like, let's say, some people's teeth when they're talking might have their upper teeth exposed, whereas some people might have their lower teeth more exposed. And then again, some of them might not have it at all. Um, so with mouth acting, you can really experiment with a lot of things here. The best way for you to determine what type of mouth acting a person would do is to look at the nat pause or the recording of the person doing the audio recording. So if you have that, it would be a really great help. Those are just some of the factors that you'll have to take into consideration. So we have quite a lot more. We have like accent and so on and so forth. Those are just some of the few things. If ever I need to leave you with something when it comes to the factors, please really look into the nat pause. With that one, we'll be looking into the actual mouth codes. So for these ones, we have movements and mouth codes, and then we have yung tips. So whenever you have your mouth codes, the main foundation of it really is more on the upper jaw and the lower jaw. So the upper jaw essentially is stuck to the skull. Because of that one, it cannot really do a lot of actions. It can't really squash, stretch, or whichever. And that extends to the teeth that are attached to the upper jaw. The movement of it really depends on, let's say, how the lips would move, which we'll be looking more into later. The lower jaw, however, has a lot more freedom. So let's say if you would like to do upwards or downwards movement, it's possible for you to be able to do that for the lower jaw. So if a character wants to have their mouth agape, or if they would like to articulate more of what they're saying, then probably you can move the lower jaw a bit more. For the upper jaw, not so much. I would say probably your cheekbones can be something that you can manipulate, but then again, that would depend on the design. Next one is on the lips. So the lips is really the most flexible part of your mouth code. So let's say any type of movement that the character's mouth would create is most likely because of the lips. So it can do a lot of things. So it can do upturned or downturned sides, which is again based on the expression. You can create relax or stretch sides. So this can create different limitations to how your air would flow out. So saying the word and saying the word all of those ones having relax and stretch sides can create different mouth codes. O shapes for creating O sounds, puckering for the U sounds, flattening of the lips for you to be able to create different restrictions in airflow, and pulling using your teeth for very specific consonant sounds. And then the last part is your tongue. So your tongue isn't really seen so much in mouth codes, not really necessarily used. But in reality, if you look into, again, a deep dive into phonetics, you would see that the tongue is responsible for a lot of articulation, particularly for consonants. But this articulation or the placement of your tongue is really seen more on the inside of your mouth. So if you don't really have that big of a mouth for your character, you don't really have much you don't really see much movement for the tongue. There are some instances, however, that you would see it. So for example, your L sounds or your TH sounds. And the way that you manipulate your tongue is really more in terms of, let's say, the mouth acting or the audio recording. So one example that I would like to utilize is this one: characters spitting throughout their speech. So if you have a character that tends to have a lot of spittle coming out of their mouth, the reason for that one is mostly because they can have their tongue out. So you can exaggerate more of that one using your mouth code that you have. And then, of course, you have your teeth, which was discussed a while ago for the lower jaw and the upper jaw. So some tips in terms of creating mouth codes before I showcase some of the conventional mouth codes that we use. First one is really character design. Please really look into not only the design, so let's say how detailed the mouth should be, also look into the personality. So for the design, it's quite weird for you to have, let's say, a very cartoon, Western cartoon looking kind of character, but the mouth looks somewhat semi-realistic. So you have to really match, let's say, the face to that of the mouth. Please take note that the mouth code is a separate layer. So try to make it so that it's as seamless as possible. So utilize the same thickness of the cleanup, utilize, let's say, the same colors, how you've done the cleanup, all of those ones would really help in tie the design together. Of course, please look into the personality as well on how the mouth codes would move. So for example, if you have more comedic characters or if your character is more of a comedian, you might want to create a lot more distortion. So you would have their mouths move more towards, let's say, diagonal sides. You can have them have bigger mouths and whichever. you can do that for your comedic characters. Femme fatales o kaya naman females that tend to be, let's say, more sexual, quote unquote, in nature, they are usually drawn with larger lips. And usually, when it comes to the way that they talk, they have a very specific type of accent, which can only be described by not so much mouth movement. So, with that one, instead of you moving the mouth so much, you can have more articulation or much more variety by moving the lips. Some things that you might want to consider again are the limitations of the movements of your mouth, the shapes of your mouth, the amount of detail that you would like to have based on the design, and then the view or the perspective. So if it's a side view, you might have a lot more variations to create compared to a front view or a 3/4. And even then, depending on your design, your front view mouth codes might be different compared to that of your 3/4 mouth codes. Next one is we have accent or voice acting. So the way that the character says their audio is really something that you have to look out for when you're creating your mouth codes. The best advice is again, please look at the nat pause of the voice actor to see how it moves. So based on the nat pause, you can create a lot of different things for the mouth codes. Another thing that we can look into is the accent. So the accent can kind of give you an idea of how to form the mouth code. To give you an example, we have here this hard TH sound. So the way that you say the, them, bathe, lather, all of those ones. It's something that's quite unique towards more westernized accents. We don't really have that in the Filipino accent. So let's say in an American accent, it's usually portrayed by placing your tongue in between your teeth, but not a lot. So you would see a portion of the tongue, but not really a lot. So let's say it's just the very tip of the tongue for you to be able to do this. So for an American accent, you don't really have a lot of variety comparing it to, let's say, a soft TH sound. So those ones would be very similar. But let's say if you were to utilize it for a Spanish accent, so the way that they say Barcelona, you would see a lot more tongue sticking out. And if you were to turn this in the field of animation, you might want to exaggerate it a little bit and then have a huge portion of the tongue sticking out, even though that's not necessarily realistic, but it's a way for you to differentiate that one. As I've stated, hard TH isn't really something that exists in the Filipino language, so with that one, you might have to remove it altogether. Next one is intensity of the mouth code. So how big your mouth codes are, whether you are, let's say, based on the emotion, whether you're shouting or you're whispering, you'll have to look that one based on your audio. So you already have your exposure sheet, you already have your audio recording. So for this one, there's no really second guessing. There's no really creating a repository. Just create what you need to have. Similar to that of backup mouth codes. You don't really need a repository, or you don't really need to do something like this, since for your activity you will be creating based on a set audio recording already, and you have already an X sheet. But let's say if you want to be an animation YouTuber in the future and you would like to create your own repository, might as well create some backup mouth codes that you won't necessarily be using a lot, but later on, as you create more and more animations, you would find that these are very helpful to have on storage. So let's say we have pre-life, we have your ADR or automated dialogue replacement, different intensity, so some mouth codes that are shouting, mouth codes that are whispering, and emotions, having upturned mouth codes, having downturned mouth codes, and having other types of mouth codes. Next one is referencing and nat pause. So this is really the number one tip when it comes to creating mouth codes. Have your reference. So that reference mostly comes, of course, from your nat pause, but the secondary, most important way for you to reference is utilizing your own mouth movement. And this is kind of a beginner's mistake. So the way that we say different words as a beginner, we tend to over articulate, or we tend to over exaggerate the way that we say our different mouth movements. And by over exaggerating, you can create incorrect mouth movements. So, for example, The best example is really saying more of the consonants. So let's say the popping sounds, so like b, b, p, p. So once you have stopped already saying b or p, so you can kind of have this slightly open sound or open mouth sound. When in reality, you're saying the B sound together with a schwa sound. So the schwa is the one that you're getting, not necessarily the actual consonant. So just having it normally like b, b, b. I'm not really sure if you can hear it through the mic. So b, p, b, b, p. So you can see that there is really not a lot of difference compared to, like, let's say the other mouth codes. So together with that one, you can also look at other mouth charts from the internet, which can help validate what you already have for your own mouth movement. And then the last step that we have is redrawing of mouth code. So again, this is not necessarily applicable to you for your activity right now, but should you be an animator in the long run, there would be some cases wherein the mouth code would not be existent in your current repository. So you would have to redraw, and that is something that is normal. So having as many backup mouth codes as possible would help reduce the redrawing process altogether. So those are just some tips, and with that one, we have the conventional mouth codes. So please take note that these conventional mouth codes are conventional. They are just samples, and therefore, they do not really have all of the mouth codes that we have. These are just the ones that we tend to see, particularly for an American and even for British, Filipino types of mouth codes. So with these ones, it can be subject to change. So right now we have around seven vowels, which ends around the schwa sound, and we have, I think, around six mouth codes for consonants. And again, this would vary according to the accent that you have and different other factors. So for example, we have this type of consonant right here. It also includes the R sound. So the R sound, this is more of an American R sound. The way that you say, we have an example right here, nearing. So the way that we say our sound, that is quite unique to the American accent. But if you go to more conventional R sounds, we have a more rolling R sound. So nearing. So you would have that kind of that roll on your tongue for you to be able to say that. And that roll of the tongue is something that can be translated to your mouth code or can be seen to your mouth code, again, depending on the voice acting. So this mouth code can be split up to another mouth code, and that would again depend on other different factors. So don't take this one in face value. You can have other changes, of course, like for example, how the teeth would show, how the lips would be formed. These are just some examples, and these are just some characteristics that you can look into, use it as a guide, but not necessarily copy entirely. So I would like to showcase some of the conventional mouth codes, and I would like to take some differences on these different mouth codes. So we have the long ah sound, the way that you say the word farm. The way that you say that is you don't really have to stretch any of your sides. All you have to do is just this lower jaw action wherein your lower jaw is going down. So ah. With that one, you can have visible teeth. You may not have any visible teeth. So it's just your mouth is going downwards. And might I say, in terms of, let's say, this vertical movement, this sound is probably the one that goes the lowest. Then you have your ah sound, which is for cat, hand. All of those ones, you would see a little bit of stretch towards the sides, and you don't really open your mouth as much as your long ah sound. Then you have nest. So for nest, you don't really see that much of a tongue. You would also see both of your teeth already, and might I say, for all of the mouth codes that we have right here, this has the most stretch sides. For your E sound, you don't have to worry about the inside of your mouth because the only thing that you have to do is to have both of your teeth visible. The stretch are also quite relaxed, and you can also stretch them if you would like to. For your aw sound, let's say for hot or join, all of those sounds, you can create it using this. So it's very much similar to, let's say, might I say, your schwa sound. But the only difference right here is that you can't really see the tongue because the lips are stretching. It's not because you're stretching your lip. You're not necessarily puckering your lips. You're just squashing them a little bit so that you would kind of have this very particular oblong kind of look. Then you have your oo sound for good, shoot, and then which. So for those ones, you really have this puckering lips. You don't really see the inside of your mouth because the lips would really pucker in and not showcase anything inside of the mouth. Then you have your schwa sound, your caret sound, and for your H consonant. So for this one, if you're not really sure what that consonant is, if you're not really sure, let's say of if you're not sure what type of consonant that is, if you have a sound that you heard and you don't really know what that sound is, it's probably this sound right here. Might I say this is the default mouth code. So if you would like to slightly open your mouth by just saying starting to say something, or if you would need to have a transitional mouth code from speaking and then slowly closing the mouth, you might want to use the schwa sound because this is more or less the default sound for most vowels. Now let's move on to the consonants. So for the consonants, you have your your b, and p sound. So all of these ones are just closed mouth. You don't really have to think so much about it. Next one is, if this is the default for your vowels, this is the default for your consonants. So you can see right here, you can see a little bit of both teeth, a little bit of space in between them, and then the sides are relaxed, which is very different than you have for your E sound. So the sides should be somewhat relaxed. Now we have your F sound and your V sound, so F and V. You can really see that there is a very specific type of mouth code right here, wherein you have the upper row of your teeth biting the lower portion of your teeth. So let's say favorable. You can see that type of movement. So it's just been exaggerated a little bit for the purposes of differentiation. And again, it's kind of a thing that you see in animation. Then you have the words jump, vision, church, and then ship. It's very much similar to this one of your this type of sound, but for this you would have a little bit of squashing, and also the teeth are a little bit closer towards this type of sound. Then you have no hard th, just the l sound. So lather. If you were to overtly exaggerate this, you would see that the tip of the tongue is touching the back of your upper teeth. So lather, long, all of those sounds can be created by this very unique consonant. And then we have our soft th and hard th sound. So the way that you're able to present this, not really seen as much right here, is that you have your tongue in between your teeth. So essentially your teeth are pressing in a little bit in between your tongue, and your tongue is somewhat outside of your mouth. So if you were to do this in a side view, you would see a lot more of the tongue. So those are just some examples of how you would do some of the mouth codes. So again, this is not the end all be all list. It's just it's just quite a guide for you to look out for. This is something that might be applicable to you. It might not be something that's applicable to you. So again, please try to look into how you would be able to utilize them according to your audio, according to your nat pause, and whichever. So let's look at one last thing, which is your actual activity, wherein you will be drawing the necessary mouth codes based on the output of your exposure sheet. So for you to be able to do this, you need your exposure sheet. If you do not have it first, create it first because it's really important. So how it's supposed to look like is like this. So you can read the instructions right here, but to overly summarize it, it just looks like this. So of course, you have your name and your section at the upper left side. At the upper center, you have to write you have to write the statement that is based on your exposure sheet. You don't have to write it phonetically. All you have to do is to write the statement right here. And I would need 3 sections at least. First one is I need to see the head of the character. might I suggest that you use the one that you're going to use for your exposure sheet. So if you have it in your exposure sheet na magsa-side view kayo, use side view. If you're going to use 3/4 view, have a 3/4 view. In this example, I have a front view. So yeah, the labels here are inverted, but essentially I should see the mouth or the head with the mouth closed, and I should see the mouth with the head open. Or I should see the head with the mouth open. So that's reversed. After that one, I should see a portion wherein I would see the vowels, and then another one for the consonants. So one thing that you can see right here is that if the sounds are very or the mouth codes are very similar, even if you have different, let's say, phonetic sounds, you have to mash them all together. It doesn't have to be the phonetic sound itself. You can just have, let's say, the alphabet equivalent, or you can have a phonetic sound if you're familiar with the IPA. So with this, try to string up the ones that are very similar in terms of the mouth codes. And the way that you're going to create the mouth codes is more or less final. So it should be cleaned up. This is the one that you're supposed to use for your final output right here. So with this one, you can add color. The color, you don't really have to do this. It's just a way for me to showcase how different they are. The design should be something that should be very similar to that of, or it should be something that is in line with the design of your head. And if you're going to do a side view, utilize a side view. If you're going to use a 3/4 view or front view, utilize that one. Make sure that they are aligned with each other. So if vowels, it should be placed in, or it should be um placed into one area of your output, and then if it's consonants, it should be placed into one area of your output. Add labels, please, so that I would be able to see. And with this one, just try to string up all that you have. And you don't need to place every single phonetic. Let me be clear on that one. If you're not going to use that mouth coat, you don't need to add it. If you're going to do pre-life, please add them. Yung let's say the vowels and consonants that you'll be using is the final one. So if the character is happy, then the sides might be upturned, and so on and so forth. So here we have your criteria. We have our mouth codes, details in your mouth codes, and record keeping procedures and quality control. So to make it easier for you, this should be the final one, so that for your module 10, all you have to do is to copy paste according to your exposure sheet. So those are just some of the things that I would like to showcase for this recording of my discussion. If you have any questions, please let me know through Discord or through email. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you were able to understand just a little bit of what you're supposed to do for your mouth codes. And with that one, I'll be seeing you during the next synchronous learning session. Have a good day, everyone.